Hey, it's Greg Otten here with MaritimeGardening.com, and today I'm going to talk about winter gardening, cold frames, and my take on that whole idea or approach. So stay with me. Well, hello, I'm here by the sea. Good morning, it's April 3rd here in beautiful spring Nova Scotia, and then today I'm going to find some squash in my tulip garden. Hi, it's Greg Otten here with MaritimeGardening.com. So, I live in an area you might call, I think it's Zone 6A. So that means, I can't remember the exact number, but give or take the maximum cold temperature, or average maximum cold temperature, what have you, in the winter here, it gets to about minus 21, 22 Celsius. I can't remember. Don't hold me to that. It might be 25, might be 21, might be 23. I can't remember exactly, but somewhere in the low negative 20s in the winter. And I know people live in Zone 5 and Zone 4 and so on, and all these properties have, all these zones have different properties, and even then, that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to have a particularly warm winter or a cold winter. It really depends on the microclimate. This is Zone 6A, but it's very damp, very wet, very windy. So even though it doesn't get much colder than maybe minus 20 in a given winter, it stays cold for a very long time. It doesn't get warm quickly here. We usually have a late the spring sort of drags, comes in slowly, and that sort of thing. On the other end of it, it takes a while for winter to get here usually, but our spring tends to be kind of sluggish here. I know people that live an hour away from me where it's a totally different dynamic, and it's just the nature of living in a peninsula on the North Atlantic Ocean. Anyway, so I'll have lots of people say, oh, do you use cold frames? What do you do? And so on. I have some cold frames in my garden, but I use them for transplanting things. I use them for growing heat-loving plants. Early in March I plant kale in these, and then around somewhere in April I'll move them from the cold frame so they'll actually germinate and start to grow in March, whereas normally nothing germinates or even begins to grow till maybe the middle of April here, unless you have a particularly good year. So I'll move them mid to late April, and then I'll direct seed things like tomatoes, heat-loving plants, in these cold frames with the covers on, and some of those I'll transplant to other parts of the garden, some of them I'll leave here. So this summer I had tomatoes, eggplant, and peppers growing in these, and it worked quite well. I didn't do any transplants in my house. Everything was done outside here, direct seeded into the ground, and especially the ones that stayed where they were started. So you direct seed it and it lives out its whole life cycle in one place. Those tomatoes did really well. So I just thought I would speak to the idea of winter gardening and growing things in a cold frame over the winter. I think it's a fun thing to do if you're into that, and if that's an exercise that you want to try, almost like a science experiment. I think you would need a pretty elaborate operation for you actually to be producing food on any sort of scale. That's my opinion, based on my experience here in this climate, based on experiments I've done. I'm not growing anything in these this winter because I've tried it before, and I found it to be kind of a waste of time. There's only so much, like in late summer when I should be planting a crop to grow in the fall here, my tomatoes and peppers and eggplants, they're still growing. The heat-loving plants that I started in here, they're still growing. It takes them usually till the end of September just to produce anyway. Some of them, like the peppers. The tomatoes start producing late August, early September. But the other things, and even then, they keep producing till October. So I'm not going to haul them out of here. I've been waiting all summer for them to grow. And there really isn't any room to plant anything else in here at that point in time. It's sort of covered in a canopy. So it's kind of pointless, but more to the point, how much kale can you grow in one of these? Not much. And this time of year, and I'll show you in a few minutes, the soil in these, it's not like it's not like you got ideal growing conditions inside of these. I mean, the conditions inside the box is better than outside the box, of course, but nevertheless, there's no source of heat in here other than the sun on the days when we get sun, and we don't get a lot of sun this time of year because it's overcast and the sun's not up for very long. So the ground freezes every night in these boxes. So how much growth do you think is going on in the plants that are in the box? I mean, they're just hanging on. They're hanging on and they're waiting for spring. And if you're eating from those plants every day, I mean, we eat a lot of vegetables in my family. So if you're eating every day from those plants, you're just going to pick all the leaves off and they're not going to regenerate. In the height of the summer, when you're harvesting off your plants and they're regenerating, you know, if you've got enough kale, you got to figure out how much kale you need to keep you going. If you have a plant like that, a leafy green type plant all the time, which we do. But in the winter, if I had this box full of kale, let's say I had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, maybe 12 plants in here, maybe not even that, probably 8. There's space for about 8 healthy kale plants in here. You know, I'd come out here and fill a bowl, and then a couple days later I'd come out and fill a bowl, and a couple days later I'd come out and fill a bowl, and then I'd have no kale for the rest of the, you know, I have like a week's worth of kale in here, maybe 2, depending on how much kale we're eating. And then I'd be out. Because in the summer, if I've got 2 4 by 10 beds of kale, because it's growing so rapidly, I can harvest a big bowl of kale every couple days, and you can't even tell I've harvested it because I'm taking off the leaves that are sort of done growing and it grows back. This time of year, nothing's really growing back, or if it is growing, it's growing very, very slowly. It can't keep up with the rate you're eating it at if you're eating it at all. So I find it much more useful to grow a lot of kale in the summer and to blanch and freeze it in like little cakes, and I'll show you that in a few minutes indoors. So I still eat out of my garden all winter long, but I'm not out here harvesting stuff. I've got everything in my freezer or in a jar or in a box. I've got potatoes, I've got different root vegetables, I've got stuff in the freezer that I've blanched and frozen, beans and greens and stuff like that. And to me, that's an easier way to do it, right? Grow things in your garden when they want to grow. Why work against, you know, why go upstream? Why walk into the wind, right? In the summer, everything wants to grow. Grow everything in the summer. And just grow a lot. If you've got the space, right? If you don't have the space, do what you got to do and do whatever. And I'm not telling you what to do or what not to do, but if you've got space, and I'm speaking mainly to people that have space, just grow more in the summer. You know, it takes, you know, one 4 by 10 bed. It takes about 5 minutes to seed that. So seed 2, that'll take 10 minutes, right? And then you'll just have twice as much. Now in August and September, you're going to be busy picking all that stuff, and you're going to be eating some of it, but you're going to be putting down a lot of it as well. But it's just so much easier to grow, right? I mean, all you have to do is put the seed in the ground, bit of water, put a mulch down, and just keep up with it as it's producing. So for me, for my time, the way I think my time is best used, it's just easier to grow more in the summer when everything wants to grow. You don't have to work so hard because the you know, nature, the environment, the climate, everything's cooperating. Trying to grow stuff in January in Canada, I just think you're working against the situation, right? The situation is not working with you, you're working against it. And that's not to mention all the time and money and energy that goes into building one of these, right? I mean, if you've seen my other videos, the various beds I have in my garden, some of them are just circles of rocks, right? I mean, it didn't cost anything, whereas this I had to buy lumber. You know, all of these cold frames, I had glass on them, and at various times the glass blew off and broke. We had a huge storm here a few weeks ago, or maybe 2 weeks ago. I mean, the whole province was shut down, and they thought it was going to be a disaster, but we didn't get any snow. Anyway, I had 2 panes of glass here, and I had them secured fairly well, but it was moving around so much in the wind, it was intense wind, that one of the panes of glass just flew to the other side of the garden, and it was like a glass bomb went off in the garden. There was glass everywhere here. So I think I'm done with glass. I think I'm going to build better plastic doors for these for the coming spring, because glass just seems to be too much of a liability. Even though I got that glass for free, it was just windows people had thrown away. Anyway, so let's have a look at the condition of the soil in these. You tell me if anything would be growing at any rate in these boxes. Alright, so let's have a look in here. So this bed here, I did everything I could. This hasn't been open for about a month or more, maybe 2 months. I did everything I could in here to generate heat. Yes, I don't have the ideal cover. Maybe with a bit better cover I could get more heat, and yes, maybe with some styrofoam or something around the inside I could get some more heat, but then it might be too hot in the spring. So what I did was I put about this much just fresh manure down here in the fall, because that's hot, right? That generates heat. And then I put some paper bags over the manure and put seaweed over the paper bags. So I got the seaweed to because it's dark and it would draw heat, and I put paper over the manure with the idea that maybe the weed seeds in manure would germinate, and then it hit the paper and die, so it would all be weeded. But the funny thing is that the fresh manure I put down is still unfrozen. But I've got manure in other parts of my garden that's just fresh, just like that too, because it just seems to generate heat. But once you get down a little bit, past where the manure is to the clay, it's got frost in it. So all the ground is frozen in these, well, that comes across on camera, icy clumps. This isn't solid because it's clay. I mean, this is a mixture of different kinds of soils, but it's full of ice. I don't know if you can see the crystals in there. So if I had something growing in here, I don't think there'd be much going on. I mean, I've done this in the past. I've done this experiment, and what you've got growing, at least in, I'm sure if you do a really, really good job, spend a lot of money insulating it, in a really solid way, I'm sure you can get more heat going on in your cold frame. But if you're doing something just quick and dirty like this, a little box that's angled, facing south, facing the sun, and all that sort of stuff, you're not getting the kind of heat in a box like this that's going to generate the kind of growth you need to keep up with the rate you eat the stuff at. Right? You'll have green plants in here and you can take pictures of it and say, hey, look, I've got stuff growing in my yard in the winter. But if you're actually eating that all the time, it just disappears. Now, I'm not speaking to Zone 7 and Zone 8 and Zone 9. I don't know anything about that. I'm not in that place. I'm not saying this can't work. And I'm not saying this can't work here. But the amount of resources and time and energy you'd have to put into this to make it work in this climate at this time of the year, for me, isn't worth the time. Given that you can grow, just grow a bit more. If you have the space, just grow more of the stuff you like in the summer and preserve it in some way, whether you're canning it or fermenting it or freezing it or whatever. For kale, it freezes fine. You blanch it and freeze it just like you would beans or peas. It's dead easy to do, very, very easy to do, and it keeps very good, and it really retains its flavor into the winter. I suppose you could even make kale smoothies out of it if you like that sort of thing. And that's a lot easier than going out to your garden in the middle of the winter and breaking off frozen leaves of kale and so on. You can just take it out of your freezer and use it as you need it. Anyway, all these other ones, same basic thing. Frozen soil, frost in the soil, very, very cold. I'm sure there's some period during each day where this warms up a bit. If it happens to be a sunny day, which today is not going to be sunny, yesterday wasn't sunny, but if you happen to get a sunny day in the winter, yes, I'm sure it heats up a bit. But ain't no sun today. Winter tends to be kind of dreary in this part of the country. Not always. We have some beautiful sunny days, but a lot of days are overcast and dreary like today. I like this weather because I grew up here and I'm used to it, but I'm sure anything you're trying to grow doesn't like it. Things you're trying to grow want sun. Anyway, that's where that is. I'll revisit it in the spring. See where it is in late February. I might even try planting in late February. It really depends on how the soil seems in there. If there's still chunks of frost in the soil and chunks of ice in the soil, I'm not planting anything in there. It's just not worth my time. So here we are in my pantry, and we've got lots of different pickles, some mustard beans and some zucchini relish and some pickles from cucumbers, and just some more of the same, and more relish. My wife's a big fan of relish, so I made a lot of relish this year. And this is some pickles and beets and more mustard beans. I'm crazy about mustard beans. If you don't know about mustard beans, man, That's some good beans. It's like beans with mustard and sugar. I don't know what I like more, the beans or the sauce. And there's some beets there. Now if we look over here in the old freezer, what do we have? We got, now this isn't everything, it's stuff's buried in here, but this is a block of kale. What I do is I blanch the kale for 1 minute. That's just, you immerse it in boiling salted water for 1 minute. And then I stuff it into a container that's about this size. It's about, I don't know, about a pint, I guess, maybe a little bit more. And then I put the container in the freezer. And then when it freezes, I take the kale out of the container and I put about 4 of those cakes into an old bread bag. Villaggio and so bread. So I got a bunch of these in here. Each one of these is enough kale for, a vegetable dish for an entire meal for 4 people. It's a good amount of kale because it's all compressed, right? And I find when you store it this way, it's hard to notice the difference from fresh. I cook all my kale anyway, and I cook it with a lot of spices and garlic and stuff. So maybe, I'm sure there's subtle differences, but certainly better than having a tiny amount of kale in a cold frame and having a couple sprigs of that. This is, the amount of kale it takes to make one of these cakes would be imagine a salad bowl full of fresh kale that's overflowing. It's mounded up over the top. That's how much kale goes into one of these cakes. It's a lot of kale. So I got kale in here. Got some rhubarb. Make a rhubarb crisp. If you don't know nothing about rhubarb crisp, that's good stuff. Got lots of strawberry jam, which I will not share or give to anyone because we like it so much. Freezer jam. Best strawberry jam is freezer jam in my opinion. Got some beans here, right? Lots of different, there's more down there varied, but all you do to freeze these is, you blanch it, and then you spread it out on a cookie sheet, and put the cookie sheet across the top of the freezer for, I don't know, 5 or 6 hours. And then once the beans are going to frozen, you stuff them in a bag like that, and they won't stick together like that. Right? So that way I can take out as much as I want for a meal, right? So let's see how they're all loose and moving around. No, it's not a frozen block. They're loose, just like if you bought a frozen piece from the grocery store. Oh, and then we just had some of these last night. You'll notice a dramatic difference between frozen peas grown in your organic garden and the ones you buy at the store. I think that's about everything in there I can think of, the different varieties of things. So here, just to give you a look at what this, that very cake of kale that was in the freezer, what it looks like once it's thawed. Looks like this. That's pretty nice looking kale. Looks almost fresh picked. Right, so I mean that's this kale won't shrink anymore. Like this is what it's going to look like when it's cooked. It's already been cooked for a minute. And all you do is you just, put your garlic and your whatever you like to cook it with in the pan. You throw this in and toss it around for a minute and it's done. You're just basically eating it. You're not even really cooking it at this stage. But that's enough for about 4 people to share, right? That's about, well, it's a good sized bowl if you look at the size of my hand, right? So this bowl would have been the kale in this bowl would have completely filled that bowl before it was blanched, because it wilts and becomes more compactable once it's been blanched. But it was in this big bowl, right? Full. This bowl was overflowing. As much kale as I could put into this bowl fit was what went into that cake of frozen kale, just so you can get a sense of volume. So here we are in the garage. It's a relatively small garage. It's a 1-car garage. It's just a workbench here. And I want to show you the handful of things I got stored in here. So down here underneath this workbench, next to a box of beer, I got some, sorry for the shaky camera work, I'm just holding this in my right hand. Some of those beans that I had buried underground, now they're on the ground in my garage. Not beans, sorry, pickles. I've eaten almost all of them. If you remember how much I pulled out of the ground. This is about all that's left. I got some stuff in my fridge upstairs that I'm working through, but I've eaten, you know, I had about 5 of these big things and maybe 6 or 7 or 8 of these, and I've worked through most of it. Big fan of pickles. My wife was giving me grief for making so many, but unfortunately I'm going to have to make this at least the same amount next year. So I'm sure she's going to be very pleased with that, because it really did kind of take over the kitchen for a while. So that's lacto-fermenter. So these are lacto-fermenter, right? They're not vacuum sealed. They're just in a culture that produces a vinegary, acidic flavor. I explained lactofermation in another video, but yeah, these aren't like the canned goods or the relish and the pickles and stuff like that we were looking at in the pantry. In my pantry inside the house, those are all vacuum sealed. These are not vacuum sealed. They're just in a culture that is just not favorable to harmful organisms. They just sort of maintain themselves. Over here, not a lot of room in here, but it's just this is a work room, but it's also sort of a storage room. We've got everything you can imagine here, but we got some the pumpkins. I had about a dozen of these, good big ones, and I gave a few away, and we've eaten some. We carved a couple up for Halloween. So these aren't the bigger ones, but they're still a good size, right? If you look at my hand, I got a 9-inch hand span if I stretch as far as I can, and that doesn't go all the way around, so it's a good size pumpkin. Anyway, these are still perfectly viable. There's no rot, no nothing. I mean, they're just keeping perfectly. As long as you don't damage where the stem is when you pick them, you leave a bit on there. Nice clean cut. That's not the cleanest cut, but there was a couple where I manhandled them a bit, and they started getting moldy around here. So you just eat those ones first, cut away the bad part. But these ones are perfectly intact. And one of these is like 4 meals worth of squash. I don't know how other people make squash, but I peel it and cut it up and roast it, and then I mash it with like butter and brown sugar and salt and pepper. It's almost like a dessert. But anyway, one of these pumpkins is a lot of an incredible amount of squash. So these will probably hold us till, I would say, the end of February. I might do one up today, and when I cut up one of these, it makes enough pumpkin for like three or 4 Sundays worth of sit-down meals. And over here, let me get this up on the bench. Let's have a look here. This is potatoes that I've stored. So let's have a look at these guys. You have all these layers of paper to sort of regulate the humidity and keep the light out. But look at those. They're perfect. They're perfect potatoes. Just waiting to be cooked. I'm going to cook some of these today, in fact. We're having a prime rib dinner. So I can't remember what variety these were, but I mean, they're just beautiful, right? Let's check out the other box. I got a video on how I store these and my logic behind that. It's not like I invented this, but if you want to watch, let's check out the other box here. All right, so here's the other box, and again, lots of potatoes. So I don't know how many that is, but I got a good amount, and you know, we eat these every week. And another good thing to do if you're new to this is whenever you're opening up your box and looking at your potatoes. I mean, this is not everyone stores perfectly. You might have a problem. You might have something that had a bug in it that went in and started making a home, ruining the potato. You got to get those ones out of there. You have to be actively engaged with your stored vegetables. Look out for problems. Look out for issues. You know, if some of them have a bad spot, use those ones up first. Anything that seems to have any flaw or blemish or anything like that, sometimes you don't notice any of that stuff. I mean, I went over these fairly carefully when I was putting them down, and But every time I open a box, you'll notice, oh, this one doesn't look right, or this one's got a bad spot, or there's a little problem here. So you got to stay on top of that. Anyway, I hope that was useful. I hope that gave you some ideas if you're mulling these things over, making decisions about how to go about getting more out of your garden and trying to get the most out of your time, most out of the energy you put into your garden. Just giving you a walk around, showing you how I do things here. Maybe there's a better way to do stuff, I don't know. But none of this stuff came to me, from a book. Just trial and error and working through it. I only started freezing my own kale a couple of years ago, and I was like, why haven't I been doing this all along? Why haven't I been growing twice as much and just freezing half of it or 2/3 of it? I don't know. I just never thought of it before. So I'm making these videos just to share those insights with other people, and perhaps that'll help you in some way, or perhaps you think it's a useless idea and what am I trying to say? I make these videos to share these insights with people, and hopefully it helps someone out that is contemplating their next move for another season, want to know what direction should I go in, where should I put my energy, and all that sort of stuff. My approach to gardening, and I didn't invent this, I'm borrowing from many great gardening gurus, is how do I get the most out of the land I have with the least amount of work, putting the least amount of money and resources into it. That's the goal. So that's my take on the whole cold frame gardening thing. I'm sure it's a fun thing to do, and if you've got the time and you're inclined that way, you go for it. But for me, my mentality, you're working against the grain, right? I'm more like, let's go with the grain. Everything, I don't see any tender greens sprouting in the forest right now. That's not the situation, right? It's a pretty hard world of survival for herbivores in the garden, in the forest right now. So why go against the grain, right? Grow more in the summer, and in the winter, enjoy the things you've put aside, and just take a break from gardening and look into other things. Or if you like being outside, maybe you can, like some of these other videos I've done where you're out in the woods gathering resources, building things, constructing things, and so on. So I hope that was helpful. Hope that resonated with you. If you enjoyed this, like, share, check out my Facebook, check out my podcast, maritimegardening.com. Until next time, get out there, get at it, and have fun in your garden. Thanks for watching.